Chapter 2. On a Broken Message. The shift from the cellar to the surface was a violent insult to the senses. Hours spent in the cloying, black humidity of the catacombs had dulled Sierra's ears and eyes, muting the world to a radius of dripping stone and her ragged breathing. The open air, heavy with the chill of late dusk, was a dizzying change in atmosphere. It was raining, a cold, indifferent drizzle that tasted of pine needles and mountain air, a sharp, metallic contrast to the vinegar-soaked heat below. It should have been a relief, a baptism to wash away the sins of the dark. Instead, the fresh air only highlighted the sheer, nauseating filth coating her. The wine and mud on her fur began to stiffen in the cold, pulling at her skin, while the smell of copper and old fermentation clung to her like a second skin. Sierra stood alone in the churning mud of the staging area. The rest of her unit was still below, finishing the sweep under Kalen's command, their muffled shouts drifting up through the grate like ghosts. She had been dismissed, relieved. The word tasted like bile, sharper than the wine fumes. For the first time in 2 years, she walked toward the supply lines without a shadow. Lysandra wasn't there to fetch the water skins. Lysandra wasn't there to prepare the holy oils. Lysandra was with Kalen, likely being praised for the very brutality Sierra had tried to curb. She located her personal cart near the merchant district's gate, a small, two-wheeled barrow meant for armor stands and weapons. She tossed her heavy warhammer in, its bladed spike lodging into the wood. She looked at her holy weapon and felt a deeper sense of defeat. Even my weapon won't obey the natural order of things today. The name she chose for her weapon the day she was promoted from squire to paladin was Faith's Judgment. A cruel irony to her now, as she felt none of her judgments today aligned with her faith. The warhammer was made specifically for her many years ago. The crescent-shaped blade where a claw would be was a personal touch she requested to honor her mother. She gripped the rough wooden haft and repositioned it to lay in the bed of the cart. She grabbed the front handles of the cart, walking forward towards the flickering torchlight across the town. The simple act of pulling it herself felt like a demotion, a public broadcast of her shame to the entire camp. A paladin pulling her own cart, she thought, the wheels squelching heavily in the thick mud, like a common laborer, like a disgraced novice. She dragged it toward the perimeter camp, a sprawling crescent of tents nestled against the city's palisade walls. The tents of the Felidae Ore were starkly organized, white canvas snapping crisply in the wind, standing apart from the messier, sprawling quarters of the Ulrakan auxiliary forces. To reach the washing station, she had to pass the Wolf brothers. They watched her come, big men, thick-bearded and draped in heavy furs and wolf-pelt cloaks, leaning on bearded axes and halberds. They were veterans of the Drakewald Forest Wars, men who had spent their lives hunting the twisted, goat-headed children of chaos in the deep woods. To them, anything with fur and claws that walked on 2 legs was a monster. Sierra wasn't a holy paladin of the Empire in their eyes. She was just a beastman in plate armor who hadn't turned on them yet. Sierra kept her head high, staring straight ahead, though her ears pressed flat against her skull. She reached the washing station, a series of wooden troughs fed by rain barrels under a sagging canvas fly. She grabbed a bucket, the steel clattering loudly in the quiet evening, and began the ritual. Her movements were stiff but methodical, an exhausting dance of disassembly. The cold rain immediately soaked into the thick fur of her head and shoulders, a momentary stinging baptism as she began the intricate work. The gauntlets were unbuckled, fingers aching with the effort, and clanked onto the cart. She wrestled the tabard free of the straps and carefully laid the heavy embroidered cloth across the cart's bed, followed by the rounded, mud-caked shoulder pauldrons. She unlaced the tight leather gorget from her neck, finally freeing her weary muscles, and placed it on the growing pile. The heavy sculpted breastplate was unbuckled next, and, with a grunt of effort, she settled it onto the cart for cleaning. Piece by piece, the curved hip tassets, the weighty protective cuisses for the thighs, and the articulated steel of the knee polians. She stepped out of the heavy steel-toed Sabaton boots and stripped off the long, sodden chainmail dress, the mesh cold against her skin, and draped it over the side of the cart to rinse. She was left in just her dark wool tunic, thick trousers, and damp boots. Her armor lay arranged on the cart, a collection of curved, filth-crusted shapes that looked like the hollowed husk of the warrior she was supposed to be. She felt exposed, stripped not just of steel, but of companionship. This ritual of disassembly was an act of intimate trust, a vulnerability she had shared with her squire for 2 years. A memory surfaced, the first time Lysandra had tried to help her don the full plate. The girl had been so small she couldn't reach the shoulder pauldrons, forcing Sierra to sit on a stool while they fumbled with buckles. They had laughed like children as straps were fastened upside down, a moment of pure, innocent bonding amidst the war. Now, that memory curdled in her gut, tainted by the phantom sensation of her gauntlet connecting with Lysandra's face. The laughter was gone, replaced by the crack of bone, and the look of betrayal in eyes that used to look up at her with adoration. Guilt, heavy and cold as the rain, settled in her chest. She didn't know if that bond could ever be forged again, or if she had shattered it permanently in the dark. Dipping a thick piece of wool into the bucket, she began the scrub, working on the breastplate first. The rain mercifully diluted the muck as she scrubbed, sending streaks of brown and purple wine runoff into the mud. The water made her fingers ache, the rough feel of the grime resisting her efforts, doing little to wash away the deeper feeling of contamination. Her faith in Sigmar, in the righteous necessity of their cause, remained absolute, a burning core deep within her, yet the memory of Kaelin's pragmatic dismissal and Lysandra's bloodthirsty zeal pricked sharply at her certainty regarding the vessels meant to enact his divine will. We are sworn to be his instruments, but are we worthy? Are we not becoming as tainted as the darkness we fight? Does the filth seep inwards, unseen? Was such callousness truly the inevitable price of long service in this blighted world? Was such cruelty truly born solely of zeal, or did some darker seed take root in those who constantly battled the shadow, a seed nurtured by endless violence and despair? The thoughts were unwelcome, dangerous even, whispers of doubt that felt like heresy, threatening the very foundation of her existence. She forcefully pushed them aside with ingrained discipline, focusing on the readiness of her gear, the reassuring weight of her hammer resting against the tent pole, its presence a solid counterpoint to the swirling uncertainty. My faith is in him, not in flawed mortals. Their failings do not diminish his truth. A large, looming shadow fell over her, stopping her mid-scrub. Well, 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 look at the cat, a rough, familiar voice drawled, dripping with contempt. It belonged to a hulking Ulrich man, his beard matted with rain and his arms thick as fence posts. Thought you beasts hated water. Keep moving, soldier. This area is reserved for the Order. Sierra's ears spun forward, then settled back warily, her spine tensing. She continued scrubbing the breastplate, unwilling to look up or stop her work. Order? He laughed and spat a wad of phlegm into the mud near her feet. Looks more like a wet beast trying to scrub off a mistake. Heard you got sent up early. Too dark down there for your precious eyes. Or did you just lose your stomach for work when it got messy? He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the sour mead on his breath. Sierra inhaled, the mix a spike of immediate annoyance. He leaned a heavy arm against the wooden post of the washing station, boxing her in against the trough. He was large for a human, nearly 6.5 feet of broad muscle wrapped in wolf pelts, but Sierra still towered over him by half a foot. Her tail, which had been low, stiffened slightly behind her, twitching at the very tip. No, do not react. The Ulrich man's gaze lingered over her, traveling down the length of her body with a slow, invasive appraisal. He looked at the thickness of her waist and the heavy, powerful muscle of her thighs, not with desire, but with the sneer of a man judging livestock. Sierra was not built like the sleek jungle cat variants of the southern cities. She was a mountain lioness, broad-shouldered and heavy-set, her weight a natural weapon she carried with dignity. Her feline body plush with dense muscle and the healthy, almost luxurious layer of fat afforded by her ancestry. A blessing in this starving land that felt like a painful curse under his invasive gaze. Too much of it around the middle, too, he sneered, pointing a calloused finger at her torso. Must be nice, having whole carts of fresh rations dropped off weekly, while we hunt and scavenge for our supper. Got to earn that bulk, eh, Paladin? Or does the Emperor just hand out the meat to his pets who lie in wait? Sierra's grip on the scrub brush tightened until the wood groaned audibly, the bristles bending against the metal. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a primal rhythm demanding violence. The urge to lash out, to silence him as Lysandra had silenced the cultist, to simply reach out and crush his throat, flared hot and seductive in her chest. Do not react. Kaelin is waiting for a reason to strip your rank. Do not give them the satisfaction. Leave her be human, unless you want to explain to your captain why you're harassing a holy officer of the crown. A voice rumbled like distant thunder, deep and rich with the lilting accent of Imperial Cathay. The Orlician froze, his finger retracting as if he'd touched a hot stove. He looked past Sierra, his eyes widening slightly. Stepping out of the rain was Ser Gregor. He was a mountain of a Phalid, a white tiger variant whose massive frame made even Sierra look slender. He wore his age in the graying stripes of his muzzle and the deep, jagged scars that mapped his arms, but he moved with the silent, fluid power of an apex predator. His long jet-black hair, tied back in a warrior's tail with a deep red ribbon, whipped in the rain, hardening the terrifying angles of his face. His eyes, pools of molten gold set in deep black sclera, held a kindness that belied his size. "Just making conversation," the human muttered. The man spat on the ground, a petty gesture of defiance, but he stepped back, turning on his heel and vanishing back into the rain. "Thank you, Gregor." Sierra let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her shoulders sagging as she sat on the edge of her cart. "Think nothing of it," Gregor rumbled, picking up a second brush to help her. "Wolves bark when they are cold. It means nothing." "Why are you up here? The sweep isn't done." Sierra looked past him, anxiously searching for signs of her battlemates. "Twisted my tail on a slick ladder, fell right into the muck of something that smelled like a goblin's armpit. Kaelin dismissed me, said I was cluttering the hallway." Gregor chuckled, a low, rumbling purr, wincing as he stretched a leg and sat down on an overturned bucket. Sierra managed a weak smile at the joke. "He's in a sour mood," Gregor said softly, the humor fading as he scrubbed a greave. "I heard about the girl and the slap." Sierra flinched. She disobeyed a direct order. She killed a source of intelligence. She was feral, Gregor. She wasn't a paladin in that moment. She was a butcher. "She is young," Gregor shrugged, his voice non-judgmental, "and she is frightened. But Kaelin forgets that not every problem is a nail for his hammer." Sierra paused, her hand resting on the wet metal of her armor. She looked at the older paladin, needing to understand what had happened in that room. Gregor, in all your years, did a cultist ever hesitate with you? Did they ever stop to talk? The rhythmic scritch-scritch of Gregor's brush stopped instantly. He didn't look at her. He stared into the dark water of the trough. The warmth in his golden eyes cooled, replaced by a shadow of something old and painful. "Once," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper that the rain almost drowned out. "A long time ago, before I was Gregor, before the Reichland." He leaned against the wooden post, staring out into the wet dark. "I wasn't always a healer, Sierra. In Grand Cathay, I was an extractor of truths. My job was to make them talk, and they did. They spoke of plans, of caches, of rituals." He looked down at his massive hands, his claws black against his white fur. "One of them told me a location, an encampment. He wept. He begged. He gave me the location of their prisoners to save his own skin. It sounded real. It felt real. So I led my squad there." "What happened?" Sierra pressed for details gently, not often seeing a side of him that wasn't filled with biting humor or unwavering support. "When we arrived, the encampment was empty," Gregor said flatly. "We went further in, and before we realized what we were walking into, shots rang out from the towers above. Dragonfire pistols picked us off one by one. I lost 12 good men that day, friends, brothers." He turned his black and gold gaze to her. "The cultist didn't lie to save himself. He lied to spend his life purchasing 12 of ours. That is why we do not listen, Sierra. Not because we fear the heresy, but because we cannot distinguish their truth from their traps. To them, a lie is just a weapon you haven't realized cut you yet." He sighed, the tension leaving his shoulders as he returned to the present. "I left that life in the mud of the East. I changed my name. I came here to the Empire, looking for a way to use these hands to knit flesh rather than rend it. I met my wife, and she gave me a reason to be a shield instead of a blade. I joined the Order to secure a future for us, a clean one." He reached into his belt pouch and pulled out something metallic, her golden censer. He polished a smudge off the rim with his thumb before offering it to her. "You have a good heart, Sierra. A healer's heart, but do not let it become a target." I don't know if I can keep going, Gregor. The things that cultist said, the way Kaelin looked at me, like I was the broken one." Sierra took the censer, the weight familiar and heavy in her hand. "It is just one bad day," Gregor said, placing a massive hand on her shoulder. "We are tired. The fumes have addled our wits. By the time the food cart arrives and we have hot stew in our bellies, the shame will fade. You did your duty, Sierra. Never doubt that." Sierra leaned into the touch, letting his certainty brace her against the cold. She wanted to believe him, to accept that a warm meal and sleep would knit the unraveling edges of her mind back together. For a moment she just sat there, breathing in the scent of rain and wet fur, trying to find the center she had lost in the dark. But the peace was fragile, and it shattered a moment later. A low tremor ran through the ground beneath her boots, growing into the distinct, heavy crunch of iron-shod wheels churning through deep mud. It was too heavy for supplies, too urgent for the hour. "Intake?" Sierra said automatically, standing up and dropping her armor on the cart again. "But I'm off duty." "Nonsense," Gregor said, wiping his hands. "If the prisoner is injured, he needs a healer. Energy's tapped out for the day, old injuries acting up." He winked at her. "I need a holy paladin to assist. Protocol dictates." "Protocol dictates," Sierra agreed, dropping the censer on the cart, feeling a rush of gratitude as she realized he was bending the rules to keep her busy and focused. They intercepted the wagon as it rattled to a halt near the containment tents. It was a sturdy, iron-barred cage on wheels, pulled by two mud-spattered draft horses. The driver was a weary-looking militiaman, his uniform stained with road dust that had turned to mud in the rain. He didn't look like he belonged in Holthusen. He had the look of the mountains about him. "Prisoner transfer," the driver called out, his voice rough. He hopped down from the box, wincing as his boots hit the slush. He reached into his coat and pulled out a rolled parchment, protecting it from the drizzle with his hand as he thrust it toward Sayera. "Here's the writ," he grunted, sounding eager to be rid of the responsibility. "Local guards reported he'd be held until after the year's end. Nasty business, if you ask me." Sayera took the scroll, unrolling it carefully to shield the ink from the rain. Her eyes scanned the official scroll. Charges: Ludwig Reichen, public intoxication, disturbing the peace, destruction of property, assault on a guard. "The guards said he fell on his own bottle," the driver added, spitting to the side. "Made a hell of a mess of himself, and when the guards tried to help him into the cart, he started swinging." Sayera looked from the paper to the man huddled in the cage. Ludwig Reichen didn't look like a man capable of assaulting an armed guard. He looked like a heap of wet laundry, shivering violently against the bars. "Destruction of property. Assault," Sayera muttered, handing the scroll to Gregor. "A violent drunkard. Keep your guard up, Gregor." "Understood," Gregor rumbled, moving to the rear of the cage. As the guard unlocked the grate, Ludwig stumbled out, his movements jerky and fearful. He wasn't the belligerent brawler the report described. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and haunted by a clarity that was far more terrifying than intoxication. He didn't swing at them. He practically fell into Gregor's arms, weeping. "Easy now," Sayera murmured, her healer's instinct warring with the report in her hand. "We have you. Walk." They guided him into the intake tent, a canvas shelter smelling of antiseptic and damp earth. Sayera sat him on a cot while Gregor stood by the flap, a silent, imposing sentry. She began the standard examination, checking his pupils, his pulse. His heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "Name?" Sayera asked gently, taking a quill to the ledger, double-checking the information in the writ. "Ludwig Reichen," he stammered, shivering violently though the tent was warm. He wouldn't look at the quill, staring instead at the shadows in the corner of the tent. I ain't crazy, m'lady. I know what I saw." "Tell me about this assault, Ludwig. The report says you attacked a guard," Sayera asked, keeping her tone neutral, testing him. "Lies," Ludwig gasped, clutching the blanket to his chest like a shield. "I didn't attack no honest man. I was defending myself. But they wouldn't listen. None of them listened. They said it was just the drink talking, but the drink don't make you bleed like this." "Slow down," Sayera said, holding up a hand to steady him. "Start from the beginning. You were in the market square." "Market? Aye, near the wall. I was heading home," Ludwig said, his eyes unfocused, drifting back to that night. He rubbed his face with a trembling hand. "I'd had a few, I won't lie. Takes the edge off the cold. And I see this shape standing by the wall. Tall fella, big heavy coat, leather beak mask. Looked like one of them fancy city chirurgeons." He swallowed hard. So I yells at him. I says, "What you looking at?" I thought he was just some straggler. But then he steps out, and the moonlight hits him. Ludwig shuddered, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "It wasn't right. The fur was all white, stark white. And his tail. I saw it twitching under the coat. It was carved up." "Carved?" Gregor asked, stepping closer, his shadow falling over the cot. "Branded," Ludwig corrected, looking up at the massive tiger with wide, fearful eyes. Geometric shapes, triangles, burned deep. I did a tour in Marienburg. I fought in the rat tunnels. I seen what they do to their own. He tapped his temple with a shaking finger. Those ain't natural marks. Those are the Fleshcrafter brands. Skaven marks. Sierra and Gregor exchanged a sharp look. A common drunkard wouldn't know the specific heraldry of the Under Empire. I got scared then, Ludwig admitted, shame coloring his tone. I yelled at him, called him a rat, told him I knew what he was. And he stopped. He didn't run. He stepped forward. He reached into that coat, pulled out a needle. Long silver thing. I panicked. I had me bottle in hand, half full of ale, and I just chucked it. He mimed the throw, his arm jerking. I heard it crunch, right on the mask. Glass went everywhere. I thought I'd blinded him. But then he looked up. Ludwig grabbed Sierra's wrist, his grip surprisingly strong in his terror. The lens was gone, and underneath, it wasn't an eye. It was green, burning green. Not like a cat's eye in the dark, it was pulsating. Like the bad stone, like warpstone itself pulsing in his eye. He ran when the guards came. And the guards, Sierra asked gently, carefully prying his fingers loose. What did they say when they found you? They laughed. Ludwig let out a sob, a dry hacking sound. I was on the ground, bleeding, yelling about the green eye and the rat brands. And they just kicked me. Said I fell on me own bottle. Rats are fairy tales, old man, they said. Go sleep it off. They tossed me in the wagon just to shut me up. Said I was starting a panic before Hexensnacht. Hexensnacht. Sierra froze, the word landing heavy in the tent. She had been so consumed by the dark of the tunnels and the rhythm of the slaughter that she had lost track of the days. She glanced at the small calendar pinned to the tent pole, just a few days away. He wiped his running nose on his tattered sleeve, his eyes shifting around the tent. I admit it, milady, I'm a drunk. I've been drunk since the war ended. I've done horrible things in my past, stole from the dead, ran when I should have fought, took my share of war spoils. I ain't no saint, and I know I ain't worth much. He looked Sierra dead in the eye, his voice firming up with a desperate sort of dignity. But I wouldn't lie about this. Not about them. He's bringing them to us, Ludwig insisted, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. Skaven never work alone. Never. Where there's one, there's 100. That butcher, he's a creation of 'em. He's clearing the town to reclaim the hole for a new pit. Skaven? Sierra thought, her mind flashing back to the cellar. The cultist there hadn't whispered of the rats. He had screamed praises to the changer of ways. She looked at Gregor, the story seeming to war with her own instinct. Skaven never worshipped anything but their own deity, the great horned rat. Maybe it is just the ravings of a broken mind trying to stitch together drunken memories. Hole? Sierra asked, the word catching her attention as the story spun to many different threads. What do you mean, reclaim the whole? Oakhaven, Ludwig said, shivering again. The whole town, it sits in the ground. Sierra frowned. She walked to the wall of the tent where a tactical map of the Reichland hung. Show me. I know every settlement in this sector. I have never heard of Oakhaven. Ludwig scrambled off the cot, falling to his knees beside the map. His trembling finger traced the line of the trade roads, moving past the known vineyards, past the Isle Heart, until it hovered over a blank expanse of the gray mountains. Here, he pressed his finger down on a spot that the mapmaker had left as a blank cup of mountain, a river leading into it. It's not on the main road. It's deep, hidden. It was once abandoned, but a temple of Sigmar was built there many years ago, right where the water comes out of the mountains. But it just became a spot for exiles to live out their days, The local guard don't do nothing for crime and are switched out every couple months. Sierra peered closely at the spot. The small blue mark of water snaked to the river Schleider, the river that ran between Holthusen and Eilhart, winding down to Axbite Pass. "A valley," she whispered, looking up at Gregor. "A natural bowl." "Yes," Ludwig nodded frantically. "Like a cup, traps the wind, traps the light, too. It's dark most of the afternoon and evening. The mountain shadow is too high." Where the sun dies early, Sierra thought. She looked up at Gregor. The big tiger was watching closely, his ears focused forward. He had heard it too. "Gregor," she said softly, "the man in the cellar, the second ritual, the cradle of stone." Gregor's expression was unreadable, his caution warring with the evidence. A coincidence of geography, perhaps. Many valleys in the Greys are deep. The report says he fell on glass, Sierra. Drunks imagine many things. "Look at his arms," Sierra commanded, pointing to the bandages the guards had slapped onto the man. "If he fell on a bottle, the cuts will be jagged, irregular. Let us see them, Ludwig." With trembling hands, Ludwig unwound the dirty rags. The flesh beneath was angry and red, but the wounds were distinct. They weren't the jagged, random tears of a man falling on broken glass. They were clean, deep, parallel slices, surgical, deliberate. They were cuts made by a blade honed to a razor edge, designed to disable, not to kill. "I didn't fall," Ludwig wept, looking at the marks. "He cut me, the demon in the coat. He had a knife like black glass, and his eyes, green fire." Gregor stepped closer, his shadow falling over the cot. He inspected the wounds, his golden eyes narrowing. He traced the line of the cut in the air, mimicking the angle. "These are defensive, but precise. No glass shard does this. This man was attacked. There's a rumor amongst Oakhaven that a single man, well, Felid, is culling us exiles in the alleys. We call him the Clawed Butcher," Ludwig whispered, his voice trembling. Sierra froze, the words of the cultist ringing in her head. "Your vessel is waiting. The butcher. He waits at the bowl." "The butcher," Sierra whispered. "He let this man live to bring us there. The guards lied to cover up their own incompetence, but the wounds tell the truth. Gregor, the cultist in the cellar, said we were the prize, the golden cat's pure souls. He wants us." Before Gregor could respond, a horn bugle shattered the quiet of the camp. It was followed by the heavy rhythmic thud of 30 sets of armor marching in unison. The order was back. "Stay here," Sierra told Ludwig, covering him with a fresh blanket. "You are safe now, I promise. Charges won't be held if you cooperate with us." She and Gregor exited the tent to greet the main thoroughfare. The rest of the Felidae Aurae were marching in through the gates, a column of gold armor slick with the gore and filth of the cellars. At the head of the column, Commander Kalin walked with a stiffness that spoke of suppressed fatigue. Just as the vanguard of the column, weary and mud-caked from the long march, began to disperse towards the relative sanctuary of the barracks, a lone rider trotted up the rise that overlooked the camps. He was mounted on a black stallion, its nostrils flaring with the exertion of a hard ride. The sight of the horse alone commanded attention, but it was the banners he bore that truly arrested the column's movement. They were the instantly recognizable blue and vibrant red of Altdorf, the imperial capital and seat of the emperor. The heavy velvet material, usually so regal, was sodden and darkened by the incessant drizzle that had plagued the army for days. Yet the woven griffin and sunburst remained unmistakable in their stark authority. The messenger, a figure cloaked in thick, high-quality wool that spoke of a station well above that of a simple courier, reined his powerful beast in sharply. The stallion skidded slightly in the churned earth, its hooves kicking up clods of mud. The rider's gaze swept over the sprawling encampments. To his left, the most disorderly section lay, the quarters of the Ulrican auxiliaries. It was a chaotic mess of smoky fires, shouting men, clattering steel, and the heavy stench of wet fur. The messenger, his features sharp and aristocratic beneath the brim of his campaign hat, gave a visible wrinkle of his nose. He was clearly unwilling to sully the high boots he wore with the foul mud of the Wolf Brothers' den. Instead, his eyes locked onto the disciplined gold and white lines of the Felidae Aurae. Seeing the stark contrast of civilized order, he dug his spurs in, guiding his steed away from the Ulrican roughs and directly toward the command element. He cut through the mud, intercepting the column just as Kalin began to remove his gauntlets. "Message for the captain of the Holthusen garrison," the rider announced, his voice carrying over the rain. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a scroll case, stamped with red wax, but he didn't dismount. He leaned down, offering it to Kalin. "I prefer not to leave this in the mud with the Ulrican dogs. See that their commander receives it." Kalin took the scroll, his expression darkening as the rider wheeled his horse around and galloped back toward the main road without another word. Kalin looked at the scroll case in his hand, then at the retreating figure. "We are not messenger boys," Kalin growled, gripping the case tightly. But then his eyes caught the seal. "Inquisition wax, High Command." "Kalin," Sayera's voice cut through the rain as she and Gregor approached. "We need to speak. Now. We received a prisoner that has confirmed a local threat." "Not now, Sayera," Kalin snapped, turning toward the command pavilion. Lysandra was already at his side, looking like a shadowed reflection of his own foul mood. "I'm holding orders meant for the wolves that look far too important to be delivered by a courier who is afraid of mud." "This is dire, Commander," Sayera pressed, falling into step beside him. "The valley, it's a trap, a specific chaos trap designed for us, like the cellars for the Ulricans. The orders take precedence," Kalin cut her off, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. "We determine what headquarters wants with the barbarians, then we listen to your ghost stories. Inside." They entered the large pavilion. The air was thick with the smell of wet canvas and tension. Kalin stood behind the central table, cracking the seal on the scroll case. Lysandra stood to his right, while Sayera and Gregor took their places opposite, the weight of their discovery heavy in the silence. A large map table with pins stuck throughout the lands, a mark of their now finished crusade, separated the commander from them. Kalin unfurled the parchment, his eyes scanning the text. Sayera watched his expression shift. The anger didn't leave, but it twisted into something darker, a predatory, calculating sneer. "What does it say?" Lysandra asked, speaking out of turn, her curiosity overriding her discipline. "Headquarters is deploying the Ulrican auxiliaries to some backwater town called Oakhaven," Kalin said, his voice low, reading the words like they were an insult. "They are to pacify a solo heretic. We remain here. Garrison duty." Sayera felt the tension in her chest uncoil, replaced by a profound, dizzying relief. Thank the comet. The trap was set for us, for the Golden Order. If the wolves went instead, the ritual would fail. The Ulricans were many things, brutal, efficient, savage, but they were not the specific fuel the butcher required. They would descend upon the valley like a landslide. If the Felidae Aurae could purge an entire city's worth of cultists in the dark, 50 Ulrican warriors would make short work of a single rogue butcher, no matter what dark pacts he had signed. Kalin read the orders verbatim, his voice dripping with venom as he recited the official ledger details. In the name of the Emperor and Holy Sigmar, protector of the realm, to the captains of the Holthusin Ulrakan Order, be it mandated by the holiest office of the Witch Hunter General that a detachment of 50 able-bodied men deploy forthwith to the region of Oakhaven Valley. Your sacred duty is the tracking and summary execution of a solitary heretic of Phalid blood. Target: a male, Phalid, white hair, golden fur, and dark fur, of tall stature, bearing the profane brands of the Skaven Under-Empire. Though heavily armed and warp-powered, the target operates in isolation. The threat is designated imminent. This purge must be completed prior to the toll of Hexenschnacht to ensure the spiritual sanctity of the Reichland. Reward for sanctification: 1,000 gold crowns to be dispensed to the company. The Felidai Aurai are hereby ordered to garrison Holthusin to secure the peace. Compensation: standard daily wage, no hazard pay, no contract bonus. 1,000 crowns for one target while we scrub wine stains from our armor for copper pennies. He looked up, his face twisted in disbelief and rage. It is one man, one stray cat with some stolen Skaven toys. We just slaughtered 300 heretics on our crusade, and we get gate duty. They get a fortune to hunt a hermit. Who signed this? Gregor rumbled. The order comes directly from the office of the High Justicar, signed by High Lady Richter herself. Kaelin tossed the scroll onto the table. The name dropped into the room like a stone into a deep well. Sierra saw Lysandra perk up, her eyes going wide. High Lady Richter, Lysandra whispered, her voice snapped with a deep excitement. My mother. Kaelin looked at Lysandra, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. She sends the wolves to handle a Phalid threat, to a ritual site. They are blunt instruments. But we are equipped for this very threat, just because her daughter is in our service. No, Kaelin, the cultist in the tunnel and the witness we got from Oakhaven proves this is beyond us. Sierra stepped in, a new, colder horror dawning on her. High Lady Richter runs the Witch Hunter Guild. She doesn't make mistakes, and she doesn't send troops blindly. If this threat has been unreported for a year, and now she intervenes personally, she knows. Knows what? Kaelin snapped. She knows what is waiting in that valley, Sierra insisted, her voice gaining strength as the pieces clicked into place. The guild must have intelligence we don't. She knows the target is a Phalid. She must know the ritual requires us. That's what the cultist said. That is why she explicitly ordered us to stand down. She isn't just keeping Lysandra safe. She is keeping the Phalidae Ore from walking into a trap that was made for our blood. She is keeping her daughter safe because she sees her as a child, not a squire, Kaelin countered, stepping closer to loom over her. She is coddling her bloodline, treating Lysandra like she belongs in a nursery rather than a vanguard. We are soldiers, Sierra. We do not need mothers watching our flank from Altdorf. Did you not flee Bretonnia for this very reason? To escape a mother who suffocated you with doubt. You crossed the mountains to prove her wrong. Do not project your own desperate need for validation onto my squire. Sierra froze, the breath hitching in her throat. The accusation was unexpected, cruel, and deeply personal, a vulnerability she had shared with Kaelin years ago. She turned her head sharply toward Gregor, pleading with her eyes for him to intervene, to check the commander's venom. But the massive tiger looked down at the muddy floorboards, his expression carefully blank. He did not meet her gaze. He did not step forward. He stayed neutral. In the silence of the tent, it felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than Kaelin's words ever could. Kaelin didn't respond with a shout or a sneer this time. He simply turned his back on her, the scroll case clutched in his hand, and began to walk calmly toward the iron brazier where the coal fire burned hot against the damp chill. Sierra looked down at the map, her mind racing, searching for a regulation, a protocol, anything to stop him. "Wait," she said, but her voice lacked the command it needed. "Is this not heresy?" Kalen stopped just before the fire. He turned his head slightly. "I am a paladin of Sigmar, just as you. We hunt the threat until the threat is dead. That is our sacred duty. And this proves our crusade is not over. Hours ago, you were ready to finish the job on the words of a heretic and a prisoner. Why now are you unwilling to finish it on the words of your High Commander?" Sierra stood silent, feeling like the room was closing in around her. The pieces fit together, and she knew it. Gregor knew it, but Kalen refused to accept it. "But we are a command element, are we not? Let us put it to a vote." He gestured to Lysandra. "The squire gets a voice in this. She proved today in the cellars that she has the will to do what is necessary while others hesitate." "I vote no," Sierra shouted instantly, slamming her hand down on the map table hard enough to make the wooden pins jump and scatter across the parchment. "Absolutely not. It is a death sentence. I vote no." "I vote yes," Kalen said smoothly. "We march and say we misinterpreted the orders. A simple mistake. What say you two?" "Yes," Lysandra added quickly, her chin raised, though she refused to meet Sierra's burning gaze. Sierra turned desperately to Gregor. The great tiger was her contemporary, her friend, the one who had cautioned her against Kalen's ambition just hours ago. He was either going to leave them at a tie or a landslide, but he was the voice of reason. "Gregor," she pleaded, confident that he would make a tie and they have to extend this to a secondary set of commanders down the chain. Gregor hesitated for a fraction of a second. He looked at the fire, then at Kalen, and finally met Sierra's gaze with a neutral, hollow expression. "I vote yes, Commander," he rumbled, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "I have served you long, and you haven't led us wrong before." The betrayal hit Sierra harder than the slap had hit Lysandra. Kalen nodded, satisfied, and dipped the parchment into the brazier. The wax seal hissed as it melted, and then the paper caught. Sierra watched in horror as the orders curled and blackened, turning into ash and smoke that drifted up into the tense peak. It was an act of treason, casual and complete. She had never seen him destroy orders before, never seen that twist of pure, selfish rebellion in his actions. Kalen turned back to her, the firelight casting long, dancing shadows across his face. The amusement was gone, replaced by a razor-sharp threat. "The decision is ratified," he said softly. "And Sierra, if you speak of this act to the troops or attempt to send word to the Inquisition," he stepped closer, "I will have you stripped of your rank for insubordination and cowardice. I will send you back to Britannia in chains, a failure who couldn't cut it in the Empire. Imagine what your mother would say to see her daughter returned in disgrace." Sierra stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked around the tent at the ambitious commander, the desperate squire, and the silent, compliant Gregor. She realized with a sickening jolt that she was completely outnumbered. Standing there in her garb while they remained in their armor, she suddenly felt small, exposed, and powerless. She felt less like a holy paladin and more like the squire, voiceless and alone in the room. They left the tent into the rain, one by one, as Sierra watched silently. She opened her mouth to speak, Kalen putting his hand up in a silent command. "You may have your squire back after we return. I want you next to me the whole ride there. You will be by my side as my dual command. I am not your enemy, Sierra. I do what's best for us all." Kalen's firm expression relaxed. He spoke softly, almost with warmth. "I didn't get this far by following orders blindly. I made my own. We make our own. We carve our paths or others will never let us. You'll learn there is nothing to worry about. That's the way of command." Sierra couldn't speak. She felt paralyzed from the jarring shift from threat to support by the commander she put her trust into. He motioned for her to join him outside. She walked behind him, her head down, as the crowd of her order gathered outside the tent, eagerly waiting for the command. "Soldiers of the Empire," Kalen shouted, raising his sword. "The Empire has recognized your valor. The orders have come down. The wolves will guard the city. We, the Golden Order, have been chosen to march on Oakhaven. We have been chosen to purge the final stretch of darkness." A roar of approval erupted from the weary Phalids, a thunderous sound of pride that drowned out the relentless rain. Sierra watched them cheer, her insides turning to ice. As she watched Kalen bask in the adoration of the soldiers he was deceiving, fragments of past campaigns aligned in her memory, the sudden marches, the crusades. In every instance, Kalen had held the scroll. In every instance, he had claimed the mandate was absolute. The realization settled over her, colder and heavier than her damp cloak. He had looked 32 armed men, men who trusted him with their lives, in the face and fed them a total falsehood with the same conviction he might read a prayer to Sigmar. He hadn't just burned the truth today. He had likely been burning it for years, forging his own legend in the ashes of imperial decrees. How many direct orders have been his alone?